Our second guest tonight is a writer and broadcaster whose often controversial views on American politics, the Middle East and Islam have earned him many fans and critics worldwide. Mark Steyn's a regular on the Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity shows, but he also writes about the arts, including musical theatre. Born in Canada and schooled in England, he now calls New Hampshire home. Mark Steyn's latest book is After America, in which he argues the US is heading for a big fall. He's in Australia for a series of events organised by the Institute of Public Affairs in defence of free speech. Mark Steyn, welcome to the Drum.
Great to be here.
If we can talk about American politics briefly at first, how crucial is this week for Mitt Romney? Can he regain momentum, or is it all there now for Rick Santorum to sweep into Super Tuesday?
No, Mitt really, at some point, Mitt has to demonstrate that he's a viable candidate, and certainly Michigan is critical to him in the way that he seems to be kind of limping through. He falls back in South Carolina, he recovers for Florida, he then falls back again, and this is troubling. Nobody is going to warm up to Mitt Romney. He's going to be a candidate. Republicans are used to this. You have to drag him across, you have to drag his sorry carcass across the finish line, and sometimes you manage to do it, as with George Bush Sr. in 1988, and sometimes you don't, as with Bob Dole in 1996. But if ever there were a time when the Republicans deserved better than that, it was this political season.
Is Rick Santorum better than that? Because Australians, I guess it's the difference in our electorate, would see him as unelectable on the basis of his social conservatism. In the last week he's had one of his key financial supporter, Foster Friess, suggesting back in his day contraception meant putting an aspirin between the gal's knees. In Australia that wouldn't play so well. How does it play in the United States?
That's not really a joke. I mean, just to get into that for a moment, that's like an old bit of folk wisdom which says that in a sense a young girl's sexuality, she has a certain amount of discretion about it, and if she wants to plead a headache and retire earlier in the evening at 9 o'clock to go home to bed and read a magazine with a nice cover story about Eleanor Roosevelt or the Queen Mother, that's healthier than maybe going out and getting blotto and at 3 a.m. not knowing whose bed you wind up in. And actually, you know...
Sure, but it's been seen as emblematic of the real social conservative Rick Santorum. Is he electable if he was the nominee?
Well, I think Rick Santorum is right to this extent, that the fact America is broke, it's got a $16 trillion of debt, it's the brokest, it's broker than anyone's ever been in the history of the planet. But that is not just a bookkeeping accident. It's to do with what kind of a society you are. And Rick Santorum, I mean, for my taste, can go on a bit about Satan and gay marriage and potential links between the two, and can kind of wander a bit too far in a bit too much of a joyless fashion for that. But he's not wrong to make the point that the character of a people determines its finances. But that's true whether you look at Greece or whether you look at the United States.
That brings us very neatly to your book, because following on from your previous book where you talked about what you see as Europe's steady slide into an abyss of chaos and financial dependence, you're now writing that the United States, its empire, is on the downturn as well. I guess Hillary Clinton was the one that says, how do you talk tough to your bank, talking about China, but you say America is becoming a slave to Chinese, to its debt in China.
Well, when money drains, power drains. Americans should know this because, in effect, they did it to Britain with Lend-Lease during the war. It was a very bizarre thing just a couple of years ago in Gordon Brown's ministry, where his Chancellor of the Exchequer finally paid off the final instalment of British war debt to the United States. The history of that debt is the history not just of a massive transfer of money from London to Washington, but a massive transfer of power too, which is why ANZUS exists. I mean, Australians know this. At a certain point for Robert Menzies, it became more important to get a good hearing in Washington than in London. There's a huge difference when money and power are draining to Beijing. That's a very different scenario from the British-American transfer of power.
But of course, Britain lost an empire at the time of the war too, and it still spent money for the next 50 years to pay up that debt. How does the United States end its problem with debt, to your mind, in that case? You can't just stop all spending.
No, you can't, but you can certainly stop totally insane spending. And anyone who's looked at almost any aspect of federal spending in particular, I mean, the United States government is moving toward a model where it spends $4 trillion, but $2 trillion of which is borrowed. And it's clear that American government has outspent America's ability to pay for it. I think there's a big question about whether it's now outspent the world's ability to pay for it. I mean, an official U.S. Treasury document calculated that U.S. government was affordable if the rest of the planet was willing to sink a fifth of its GDP into U.S. Treasury bonds. That's absolutely astonishing. You know, we've been talking about the presidential candidates. When Newt Gingrich said he was in favor of putting in an American space colony on the moon, I say, why stop there? You've got to go way beyond that. You've got to find Planet Zongo. The Chinese have lent America as much money as they want to. You've got to hope there are some little green men out there in some distant galaxy who want to pick up the slack when the world decides it doesn't want to sink a fifth of its GDP.
That's very interesting. We have to see who the nominee is and how they're going to restrain that debt. But thank you for joining us. That's all for The Drum today. Thanks very much to the panel too, David Hetherington, Jessica Brown and John Stanley, and Mark Steyn joining us as well. You can check out the website at abc.net.au/The Drum. I'll be back same time tomorrow night. See you then. Good night.